Hi guys, you join me here with Corner of the Galaxy's Josh Guesman. How are you, Josh?
I am excellent. And yourself?
Very, very well, thank you. Very well. Really appreciate you coming on here today.
Yeah, absolutely, not a problem. I know there was a time difference thing. We worked that out. So, it's early for me, it's later for you. You're in the future, I'm in the past, so we can figure this out.
I can tell you, the world is still going. It's all good.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
I'm having my last cup of tea of the day, and everything's gone smoothly. So,
all right, good.
Don't worry, no worries there. So let's take you back. Obviously, you are, just for reference for people who aren't aware of you, the hugely successful podcast and YouTube channel Corner of the Galaxy, and website as well. There's lots of different resources people have on there. You've had super guests over the years,
Yes.
some very high profile names in the LA world and obviously the world of MLS as a whole. But how did you get into it? What was your starting out in soccer in the LA Galaxy world, or where did you start?
Yeah, I mean, I played soccer growing up, and so that was sort of always my reference point, but I was probably more of a baseball player than I was a soccer player. So, in and out of that type of thing. I was playing on an adult league soccer team, and they were like, hey, we're going to go to a Galaxy game. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll go. That sounds like fun. Like, I've never been to an MLS game, and, it's 2008, so why not? Should probably go. So we went, and the Galaxy lost. I think they lost like 6-2 or something like that. It wasn't really that close. Yeah, it was really, really a wacky game. And I was like, I need to go back there. Like next week, I need to go back there. And so eventually,
who was that against? Do you remember who it was against?
I want to say it was like against Houston or something like that. It was
okay. Decent, quite a big team then. Yeah,
especially in 2008 was Houston was a better team than they have been certainly in recent past. But so the LA Galaxy were technically a good team, although 2008 was a really bad year. Maybe not comparatively whenever you look at 2017, but 2008 was a really bad year. And Bruce Arena had just joined as the head coach here, and he wasn't really doing much because it was towards the end of the season. So I only got like a couple games really in, and then the season was over. 2009 comes around, the LA Galaxy made it to an MLS Cup. We started our podcast in 2009 simply because somebody had started a podcast network and said, hey, we need an LA Galaxy podcast. I was doing a show where you would call in. It was called Around the League. It was a very popular podcast, like in 2008, 2009, probably all the way until like maybe 11. Every team had people who would call in about your team. So you would call in, and it would be like a little call-in show. They'd ask you about your team. It would be about 5 or 6 minutes, and then you'd be done. There were usually 2 or 3 people who covered every team because they wanted to make sure they always had somebody available. Yeah. The other guy who was doing the LA Galaxy, his name was Gerrard, and so he and I had never met each other in person, just over Twitter, which was becoming quite the rage in 2008. Yeah. So they asked us if we would do an LA Galaxy podcast, and we both looked at each other and said, "Well, that sounds like a horrible idea. I don't think it would be very good, and I don't know how to podcast and the whole deal." So we did one. We turned it in, and it was horrible, really bad. And the guy who was there at the time said, "Great." And he goes, yeah, well, give me another one next week. And we're like, okay. so we did it again. That was sort of how it started. And, soon after we sort of filled our roles and figured out how it would do it, and how we would sort of progress the podcast. So we started in 2009, and we just went over 1,000 shows. So the podcast morphed from a 30-minute once a week show to a probably hour plus twice a week show. So we do Mondays and Wednesdays, or excuse me, Mondays and Thursdays. You'd think I would know when I podcast. Sometimes not.
All I know is when it hits my feed, and it's all good. I should say to people, it is very, very high quality. We were discussing before, but Josh doesn't have a background in audio or engineering in that sort of sense. But actually, you wouldn't know from the quality is absolutely spot on. It feels very, very professional. I guess that's just a product of doing it since 2009.
Yeah, for 15 seasons. Yeah, that's you get better at it. And I realized very quickly, and it's my biggest advice to anybody who's thinking about starting a podcast, is if your quality is bad, nobody's going to listen past. I don't care how good your content is, nobody's going to listen, because I do that. I'll be like, oh, here's a new podcast, let me play it. It's like comes in scratchy and you can't. I'm like, nope, not going to work. Sorry, thanks, and that's it. And I will never know how good your podcast is because of the quality. So it's so much easier now, like with USB mics that really are low cost but high quality in terms of what you need to do. You don't need to have a soundboard, although some of the soundboards are cheap and expensive, and like you can do the most things with them. So it doesn't take a lot.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, I've learned the hard way. I've had a few of my YouTube things where I've uploaded it and checked it and thought it was okay, but then suddenly the bed's much too loud, so the interview's getting lost, and it's awful. You can't put up with it. So yeah, apologise to people who have watched those in the past. I've re-uploaded most of them, so they should be listenable now, and this one's turned out all right as well.
Yeah. I mean, we'll never know, right? You're recording it in 3 different places like I do, because I always tell people I record whenever I do my stuff. I usually have 2 or 3 recordings going at the same time. They're like, well, why do you do that? And I go, because I'll usually forget to record on 2 of them. So at least one of them will be there. So we'll get the show.
That's exactly it. Yeah. You need new belt and braces, I think is what we would say over here. But so when you first started going to those games, how many MLS Cups did LA have by that point?
So they had 2. So it was 2002, 2005. And then in 2009, they went to an MLS Cup final, which was a surprise, right? And I actually went to that game. I was up in Seattle because at that point they were holding the MLS Cup at a neutral site. So it was just in Seattle. So it was like, okay, it's going to be in Seattle. So I went up there with a buddy, and we actually sat like 3 rows from the field up in Seattle, and it had rained all day and it was cold, and we watched the LA Galaxy losing penalty kicks. So we watched Donovan Rickens, the LA Galaxy's goalkeeper, break his hand in I think the first half. We watched they had to have their backup come in, so I think Josh Saunders was in there at the time. We saw Landon Donovan miss a penalty kick that sort of did it. David Beckham converted his. There was a lot of things in that game that you look at it and you say the Galaxy were probably the better team in that win, but it just felt like it wasn't going to happen. Really interesting. I always tell people that's one of my favorite seasons that I've ever sort of watched the LA Galaxy, because it was so surprising for them to even make it to like an MLS Cup. And so it's just a weird thing. And I always think that these things happen in cycles and for reasons. And so 2009 had to happen for 2010 to happen. And 2010 was a Supporters Shield winning year. But then they got knocked out in the playoffs by a Dallas team, and it was very surprising because the Galaxy were the best team in the league for the whole year. And you're like, okay, well, 2010 had to happen in order for 2011 to happen, which was an MLS Cup winning year, and 2011 had to happen in order for 2012 to happen in a much different way. 2011 was a dominant season for the LA Galaxy, Supporters Shield and MLS Cup, and then they go into 2012, where for most of the year it looked like maybe they weren't going to do anything. They were sort of just middling in that MLS Cup hangover, and then you come into 2012 in the playoffs, and all of a sudden they're the best team in the league again. And so they went and ran that table. And then 2013 happens because they're tired from 2011 and 2012. You thought maybe they could go for the three-peat. They didn't, but then 2014 is the result of that sort of coming back. So you can sort of see how all of these things feed into each other. The hard part, though, is that you never know exactly in the progression where any team is for this stuff. So I can't tell you if, all the bad years for the LA Galaxy that have sort of happened since 2017, I can't tell you if those were all progressions to lead to something. Sometimes you're just a bad club for a while. So right now, that's the LA Galaxy. They're kind of just a bad club for a while.
That is so strange, because from my sort of naive point of view, I'm seeing a lot of what, to my mind, would be big clubs, the most famous ones in there, and they're not the ones doing best at the moment, with the exception maybe of LAFC, but it's who obviously had the latest win. Right. A lot of the big clubs are not the best ones at the moment, and it does change up quite a lot. I think that's one of the big pluses of MLS.
Yeah. You also have to look at expansion teams get extra money, extra allocation money. They get some extra advantages. Now, a lot of times they need them just to be competitive within the first year and try to make the correct signings. But if you do get those right, you come out with sort of a severe advantage. And if you build your team correctly, even as you get out of the extra allocation money, you can sort of set yourself up for a little bit more what we call long-term success in Major League Soccer, which is like being good for 2 or 3 years, because it's really hard in Major League Soccer to keep players that you like, to constantly turn over the roster and get new players in. MLS is not made for long-term success. You win one, and then the next year you're probably not as good. That's sort of how it's been. And I think that's been exasperated now that there's 29 teams, in the league. It's a lot of soccer every single weekend. There's too many games. There's 14 games every weekend. It's a lot to watch. Absolutely, yeah. And as you can see, that there are a lot of cultivating of really good players, good young players who are getting picked off by other, sort of European teams and that sort of stuff as well. So it's hard to keep going when you lose your talent. I mean, you look at a team like Dallas, who's known for that sort of developmental pathway that over to Europe and other places. But the problem that I always have with that is Dallas doesn't win things within the league. They might be good, but they don't win things. And then they go and they sell their best player. And it's like, yes, you get that money and that's good. But I think Dallas fans will probably like an MLS Cup, outside of the one that they got. I forget what it might have been, the 2013 one. It's known pretty much as like the worst MLS Cup ever because it was 0-0. It went into extra time. And an own goal was the reason that it was done. It was Colorado and Dallas in that. And I think it was up in Toronto. It was cold and like all this other. It was great. I mean, it was great for just the sheer horribleness of those particular games. But they probably, Dallas should deserve sort of better. I always wonder how, and I know some of their fans, but like I always wonder how their fans sort of handle that. That yes, congratulations, you're known as this wonderful team that can sell talent and develop talent, but you don't win anything in the league. So I always think that's sort of the balance, and I think the LA Galaxy have sort of an opposite problem, which is if you're an offensive young player in an LA Galaxy organization, you're never going to play for the senior team because that the LA Galaxy are going to go out and get somebody like Chicharito. They're going to go get somebody like Zlatan Ibrahimovic, right? Even Dejan Joveljic, who is a real talent at 22, 23, is a guy who you're like, I hope he gets the time to sort of play because he's not a superstar. He could be an unbelievable player, but he's not a superstar. And LA, I guess I'm old school. We have this discussion all the time on the podcast. People who have listened to me since 2009 know I've been consistent since 2009. In Los Angeles, you need stars and you need winning, and it does not work without either of those things. You can win and have no stars, and the stadium will not be full, right? And you can have stars and you're losing, and the stadium will not be full. So you need to have both of those things that sort of kick off. That obviously David Beckham is the sort of key, but Robbie Keane is also the answer to that. Maybe not as high profilely known as, especially in the United States, but Robbie Keane was a star enough to draw along with David Beckham and Landon Donovan. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, obviously earth-shattering star. So much fun to cover. Really cool, really interesting guy. I always had really good interactions with him. I know he can be difficult, and that was sort of fun. But Zlatan was always entertaining, and he was always fairly nice to me. So it was always nice. David, by the way, was fairly nice to me as well, especially as a young sort of reporter. I used to be young when I started this too. That was the whole thing. So, but David was super nice. Most of the guys who we've had at the LA Galaxy have all been great guys. So really, really interesting. But you need that. You need the stars. You need the winning, and that's something the Galaxy have missed. So they've had some stars, but not the winning.
I mean, I think it's the quintessential club in MLS for stars, but for attracting the biggest talents. And I think Steven Gerrard, another one we haven't mentioned there, came over, and it seemed to be the go-to. I mean, it was the one that people knew over here. Certainly when Beckham went over, and I know a lot of my Liverpool supporting friends watched it when Gerrard was there, just exclusively. So it pulls in people from different worlds that wouldn't normally be watching.
Yeah, as somebody who tracks rumors and tries to figure them out and all that stuff for the LA Galaxy, it's annoying because if there's a MLS team somebody's coming to, it's probably the LA Galaxy are going to be mentioned in there. And a lot of times you get the LA completely confused. So they'll be like, oh, this person's coming to the LA Galaxy. It's like, no, that's the other team. And then it's like, oh, this person is coming to that's the other team. Or, it constantly goes there. And the Galaxy are mistaken for other teams within things constantly.
Gotcha,
so
right.
We talk about that with Greg Vanney, who's the head coach of the LA Galaxy now. We talk about that with Greg all the time. We're like, he goes, we get linked with a lot of players. He goes, most of those aren't true, but we're like, okay, well, we'll just keep asking. So certainly the Beckham thing, and the Galaxy, even though they haven't been winners since the 2014 season, and they played well in 2015 and 2016. 2017 was sort of that downturn, and 2020 was atrocious. They're still the team with the most MLS Cups in Major League Soccer, right? And so they still sort of have that flag that they get to carry. And they've had success. And a lot of people's introductions to Major League Soccer was David Beckham or Robbie Keane or Steven Gerrard or Giovanni Dos Santos or Jonathan Dos Santos or Zlatan Ibrahimovic, or they've had a lot of big names. Some of those have completely been horrible signings. Steven Gerrard was certainly one of those that did not pan out. Super nice guy. Really enjoyed talking to him. The first day he sort of I know English players come over and they're not used to the media. because we're there all the time and they have to talk to us all the time. And, it's a whole thing. And he came in, shook everybody's hand, say, "Oh, hi, I'm Steven Gerrard." We're like, "Yeah, dude, we know who you are." But super nice, super kind, always was a really good guy. But yeah, it just, it didn't work out. There's a funny story about Steven Gerrard that somebody within the organization once told me. They were doing drills. And they're out there on the practice field and they're doing this drill and Gerrard goes to I think to Robbie Keane. He goes, "Man, if I do this drill, I'm going to tear my hamstring." Like, he goes, "I swear this drill is not going to be good for me," like the whole deal. And Robbie Keane, being Robbie Keane, is like sort of like, "Just go out there and do it, like, go do it." So he goes out there and he tears his hamstring. So like it was like all these little things, maybe it was a hamstring, maybe it was a calf, who knows what it actually, like what the whole story actually was. But it was like one of those things where it was just his time, unfortunately, at that time. So scored a couple cool goals, was always fun to have around and talk to. But ultimately that season, I think 2016, ended with Robbie Keane and Steven Gerrard starting playoff games on the bench. So that was an interesting year.
Yeah, much always similar to the Bale situation, I guess. Now at the on the other side of the city, it's that's an interesting one. But I mean, when I mentioned LAFC, you didn't growl earlier on, so I'm sure that there isn't an aggressive rivalry there. But obviously, proximity-wise, they are a close club, but obviously don't have the storied history that you guys do have. Is there a rivalry there yet, or is it sort of build version? There is. Okay.
It's. I mean, I may not take it as seriously because I'm in the press box more than. But I can certainly tell you the witness. The two teams hate each other.
Wow. Right.
Whether that's players, coaches, front office staff, the pettiness is slightly above kindergarten level. Whenever you're talking about it, and. Like, that's usually, I'm like, I expect that from fans and I expect that from supporters, and I get it. I don't expect it from professionals within organizations, and both of them can sometimes be less than professional with the little jabs that they sort of take it, not giving people parking to places. Like, it's like, "Oh, well, you want to be in the press box? Oh, well, we don't have all the room in the press box," and the whole deal. And it's like, just act your age a lot of time. That's where I get sort of tired of the whole thing. But it is absolutely, I think, MLS's biggest rivalry. And I say that knowing the history that surrounds most rivalries. It's one of the reasons that they're going to open the season at the Rose Bowl. Was because and it's one of the reasons that Apple TV, which has the $2.5 billion deal over the next 10 years, has that game as like their first big game, is that broadcast at the Rose Bowl between the LA Galaxy and LAFC. So I think that MLS loves to just drive rivalries into the ground. Like, they'll make them play each other 7 times in a season, and you're like, please stop.
Yes.
Like, it has to stop. You can't just keep doing it the whole time. But that's another reason you sort of look at that and say, okay, I think they know it too. I think most people, even though Seattle and Portland will like argue with you and say, "Oh no, this is a bigger rivalry and it has more history." Absolutely true. It has more history. But these two teams hate each other. And it started with the Zlatan game. So, I mean, the absolute biggest game in the history of both clubs was the first time they ever played each other, and with Zlatan Ibrahimovic scoring the goal from 30 or 40 yards out after flying on a plane the night before and landing, and then like coming on in the 60th minute or 70th minute, and he takes 2 touches and scores a goal from 30 yards out, 40 yards out. Yeah, and so and that sets the tone for the whole thing. I mean, that game was 3-0 at one point, LAFC, and then the Galaxy made it 3-1, and now all of a sudden it's 3-2, and then Zlatan scores with his and it's 3-3, and then he scores the game winner from Ashley Cole. There's a name we haven't mentioned yet. One of my absolute favorite players, Ashley Cole. Smartest, kindest, just like would love to talk about soccer all day. Just
really? Fantastic.
Yeah, and I know he doesn't necessarily have that reputation in the English press.
Yeah, but you never know. Things get twisted a lot over here, so you never know who a player really is.
I went to Stamford Bridge. I was visiting. I had some work doing stuff. I have a real job, so I was doing real job stuff. But I had a weekend in London by myself, basically. Yeah, which is like amazing. I was like, this is great, and my wife was not so happy. No, not so appreciative of it. But I get to go where I want to go. I get to do what I want to do. It's going to be awesome. So I went, took a tour of the stadium, and then went to a game. There was an FA Cup game that I got to go between Chelsea and Newcastle. And so I went and did that, and I was talking to people about Ashley Cole, obviously being at Chelsea and the whole deal. I'm like, there were a lot of people who really couldn't stand him, and I'm like, really? And they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a sports reporter. I cover the LA Galaxy. He's on the team right now. And they're like, oh, is he mean? I'm like, he's the nicest guy in the world. I have no idea what you're talking about. But just a super talent. I can see that. I would hope eventually he really hits like upper levels of coaching, because I feel like he has that ability to do that.
Oh, wow. One to watch. That's interesting.
Yeah, Nigel de Jong, by the way, is another guy who I think gets a really bad rap, and who played for the Galaxy for a little while and was one of my favorite players. Between him and Ashley Cole, those guys are probably two of the smartest footballers I've ever talked to. And Nigel sort of has the whole he's going to break your legs and that's all he ever does type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to admit, I wasn't out on the practice field with him, so I can't tell you whether or not he would have tried to take me out. But in our conversations, and we did a one-on-one interview, one time he sat down and talked to me for about 20 minutes. He was outstanding, just so insightful, so smart, loves American culture, American cars. I think he's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, so an NFL fan. So he was really enjoying sort of being in MLS and with the Galaxy, and then that turned sour because they eventually had to get rid of him in the middle of that season as well. So he was going to become a designated player, and I guess upper management at the time didn't want him to be a designated player or something like that. So they had to transfer him out just before the season stops. And we talked to Bruce Arena a couple of years afterwards, and he said, if he would have stayed, we would have won an MLS Cup that year. He like Bruce and Dave Sarakin, who was the associate head coach at the time, were all in on Nigel de Jong. They were like, he is such a talent, and he could have stayed here for years and been a really good player. So really interesting.
You never know. He might come back. Obviously you made an impression on him. So you never know. And in a senior position, if there's something coming up, then you may see him again.
I would welcome Nigel to come over anytime. Him or Ashley Cole could come over and be coaches. I think anytime. They would be excellent additions for the club.
That's great to hear your insight, because as you've said, I mean, the British press like to really paint people very one-dimensionally. He's a bad guy. He does this, right. And then that's your narrative. That's the frame, and everything's framed in that way. So they really do give people a hard time. So it's really nice to hear good things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure David Beckham is maybe more polarizing in the UK than he is here. But he spoke to everybody after every game. He talked to you. He learned all the reporters' names. Like he never big timed anybody, which is really crazy to think that one of the most popular footballers in all of the sport, especially at that time.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, huge, massive. I mean, I always the popularity scale goes, does my mom know who you are? Right? Yeah. Like that was always. And with David Beckham, she's like, David Beckham's coming, and I'm like, yeah. That she called me whenever she heard that one. So I was like, oh, okay. So that's as high as it has ever gone. So even Zlatan is way down that peg. Whenever Mom, have you heard of Zlatan Ibrahimovic? Yeah, it sounds familiar. I think so, maybe. That type of thing. So it's like, okay.
Yes,
we're in there.
You get that sort of, have you heard of Zlatan Ibrahimovic? Doesn't he own Chelsea? That's oh,
I like that. That's a good one. I'm going to use that one.
But Beckham was, I remember going going to Thailand and you seeing Americans wearing Beckham shirts, and you think, this is insane. This has gone way beyond the Premier League, way beyond football, I think, way beyond soccer as a whole. So, yeah.
Well, if you want to know the sort of worldwide proliferation of the LA Galaxy name, it's because of that, because of David Beckham. And it was because people wanted to wear the Beckham jersey. I mean, we still get pictures sent from Africa, from Asia, you name any continent, and somebody will be in a Beckham LA Galaxy jersey, right? And so it's still there. Zlatan obviously helped that too. So many people love Zlatan Ibrahimovic. You can see it. They would be wearing it all over. We see pictures on Twitter from people like, oh, hey, I'm a fan in France, or hey, I'm a fan in Russia, or any of these places. It's like, oh yeah, and you're like, yep, there they are. There's the jerseys. So those sort of things can't be underestimated, I think.
No, absolutely. It was an extremely clever move from that. I think it's paid dividends. It will continue to pay dividends for decades. I would have thought, just that one transfer. But who are the key players today? Who are your DPs? Who are the players you're going to be relying on for this season?
Yeah, the veteran on the squad is going to be Javier Chicharito Hernandez.
He's a bit of a legend, isn't he? Yeah,
he is Mexico's all-time leading scorer. Played at Manchester United. He's played a bunch of big clubs, but Manchester United was probably his big sort of breaking off point. Whenever he really started to hit something, Chivas in Mexico for a little. So there's some storied history there as well, just with playing some of the big teams. Came to the LA Galaxy during basically the pandemic. So 2020, got to play one game, and then the world shut down. He played that year, and I think he only scored 1 or 2 goals. He was injured, oft injured, as they say. And so it was a real sort of disappointment whenever you looked at all the things that were sort of happening with what he did. Came back, got separated from his wife, and that sort of lit a fire under him for whatever reason. And so he came back in much better shape. So 2021 was a really good season for him. 2022 was a season where you expected him to sort of, again, fall off a little bit as he's getting a little bit older. He's now 34. Last year, he put some good numbers together, but still had a good spell of injuries in some different sections. And then the last year made it all the way through the season, but had about the same production as he did the year before, even with some injuries and that type of thing. Wow. So now you're asking yourself what you're sort of getting out of him this year at 34 years old. How many minutes? I said he was going to be limited to about 2,000 minutes last year, and he played almost 3,000. So shows you what I know. And we talked about Dejan Joveljic, who's a U22 player. So MLS has those youth designations for different things. The Galaxy had a young designated player in Kevin Cabral, who they traded to Colorado in the offseason because as much as that guy could get 7 breakaways every game, he couldn't finish any of them. And so it sort of became this thing. So he's now with Colorado. So so they have an open designated player spot. So they don't have that filled right now. Douglas Costa, who is world known, but certainly past his best days, had a season in which he was injured very much at the beginning of the year last year and sort of built into the season. Greg Vanney and the sports medicine team did a lot of work to try to stabilize some of the injuries that maybe he hadn't taken care of, and did a whole bunch of things. And so the last 10 games of the season, you could see that there was a noticeable difference in Douglas Costa. We'll see if he ends up playing this year. There's still a lot of speculation that the Galaxy could buy him out because he's an unknown commodity. I mean, he's not a 34-game player, and the Galaxy could play as many as 50 games this year. So they need some reliability there. And they don't have currently no wingers basically on the whole team. Like Douglas Costa is considered a winger on the LA Galaxy. He's not a true winger in that sense. So he's there. So those are the 2 DPs, but everybody wants to talk about Riqui Puig as well, who's not a designated player. Sure. But he came in the summer transfer last year, and just ever since he got on the field, the LA Galaxy were the team that you kind of expected him to be. Dynamic, quick, has some real vision with some passes. I mean, I'm from the David Beckham era. I've seen a lot of really good passes. David was a master with shaping balls and finding places, and Riqui is in a different way a lot like that. More on the ground, more in between the lines, and he loves to sort of break the different lines with passes and find those in behinds and little slips and all these things. And he draws a ton of attention. If you watch and go back and watch some of the games, he'll draw 3, 4, 5 players to him in the center of the field, draw them all in there, and then dish out. And it's like, good. He takes a ton of abuse, but he's young. So for right now, that'll probably be okay. But MLS is a pretty physical league. And so he's going to have to do that. But Riqui has been so much fun, Barcelona player. And, sort of. They didn't
gone anywhere, I think. But before he made the move to MLS, he was in demand everywhere.
It seemed to be. And then he also was, Barcelona was like, well, we're not going to take you on the preseason. And he was like, well, why aren't you taking me? And there was all these things about how he was this horrible player, or like this horrible personality in the locker rooms. And I don't know, maybe he hides it well. Obviously, I think sometimes we just get the versions that they want us to see. And I can understand that, but super nice, humble kid. I mean, we call him a Disney character because he's like this like wholesome little blonde haired, like bright eyed kid, and he just looks like he belongs in a Disney movie somewhere. And so he's been a revelation. The Galaxy played the way they did, which was some of the best soccer in Major League Soccer down the last 10, 12 games because of Riqui Puig. And then his teammate as well, Gaston Brugman, who's another targeted allocation money player, TAM player. And between those 2 additions, the Galaxy started playing, I think, the way that Greg Vanney wanted. So you could really see it. And Brugman has been just a fun. He's such a fun character too. Just a total footballer. Just absolutely. He's like 5'8". Like he's not big, and you look at him, but like you wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley, like that type of thing. If you saw him coming, you'd be like, nope, I'm going the other way. There's something about him that is just a little bit on edge all the time, and such a fun talent. Really combines well with Riqui. So there's some. I mean, those are sort of the big names. Unfortunately, I would love to say that there's another designated player on the way. There should be.
Yeah,
and we've been hearing from Greg Vanney that those could arrive here in the next couple of weeks, but we don't know who that is, despite everybody yelling Isco back and forth. I can tell you that we don't know that that's necessarily a true rumor. As I said, rumors in LA Galaxy, they get pretty muddled pretty fast. So Isco probably doesn't even fit into the formations the way that we're sort of looking at them, but that's sort of the big rumor that's out there right now.
Would you want it to be a winger, striker?
Winger has to be a winger. Yeah, they don't have any. I mean, they picked up Memo Rodriguez, which is a very good depth piece for Major League Soccer. He started for Houston as a midfielder, and he can play probably all the positions across the midfield. So a good depth piece, but he can play winger, so he can be in there. But the Galaxy don't have any true wingers right now. I think they've been playing Julian Araujo, who is right back and who's a real sort of up and coming talent. I would expect he's in Europe here in the next 18 to 24 months probably is the timeline for that. Although we thought that was the case maybe 2 years ago, that you would also and it's just slowly plodding along and going that way. So, but Julian Araujo's been playing up at winger. Raheem Edwards, who knows Greg Vanney and played with him in Toronto. He's been sort of a left back / wing back that has sort of played in those positions. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing winger right now as well, because the Galaxy have a little more depth at defense and on the outside backs than they do on the wing. So I think you need a DP wing. They had to sell and transfer Samuel Grandsir, which I think was not a player they were expecting to get rid of, but he had some family issues back in France. And so he asked if he could go back to France. And so they moved him about 2 weeks ago, or maybe even just a week ago to move out. So Kevin Cabral was a winger. He's gone. Samuel Grandsir was a winger. He's gone. Those were two starting wingers. Then you have Douglas Costa, who's not a winger, but plays one on TV. And so he's like sort of the only one. Memo Rodriguez is sort of a guy who can play in that. There's some young guys who possibly could come in and be some wingers and do some things like that. But Greg Vanney has said multiple times now he wants more production out of those wing positions, wants more goals, more assists. And so I think that if you're playing the betting game, that a designated player could come in. Really interesting too, because in MLS you have the DPs and then you have the young DPs, and having a young DP gives you some benefits in there. And so right now the Galaxy are set up to have a young DP. So that would mean that they're going to go out and get a winger who's, under 23 or under, which is always more of a gamble because you don't know what, we love to pretend that we can find talent in any young player, but young players are young. They're not developed yet. So they need to keep taking those steps forward. They could stop at any time. So, and the Galaxy haven't had a lot of success in developing young players. So.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, it's good to have that system, and I think it is playing a much bigger part, isn't it? The youth academies playing a much bigger part in MLS than they had done previously.
It feels like it. Certainly, Philadelphia has that argument, and the Philadelphia Union went to MLS Cup and played in one of the most exciting MLS Cups against LAFC, and Gareth Bale scoring the tying goal that eventually sent everything to extra time and penalty kicks. So. But Philadelphia was sort of set up as this youth team. They do a lot of youth development. They don't spend a lot of big money. They sell players, much like Dallas. They're a not as successful in selling players as Dallas team, but they're more successful on the field than Dallas. So they have the better balance right now. And that's been a project that's been going on for, I forget how long Jim Curtin's been there, but that's like 7 or 8 years that he's sort of been building. And Philadelphia was very good the year prior, and now they were really good this last season. And I thought at one point was playing some of the best soccer in Major League Soccer for a long while. I was surprised they actually lost the Supporters Shield to LAFC. They had one stumble late in the season that sort of cost them, and that was it. But yeah, so you can see that the youth development is there. I think, Julian Araujo is a little bit of a youth developed guy that came through. And I think the Galaxy have developed defenders better than anything else, because we talked about how offensive players don't really get to see the field for the LA Galaxy. Well, defenders do, because a domestic defender is like gold in Major League Soccer, right? Don't have to use an international slot, and you can pay somebody $400,000 or $500,000, and it's like right in the sweet spot, and you get to keep them for a while. So the Galaxy have gone through guys like Daniel Steres, who's now with Houston, Dave Romney, who was with Nashville on one of the best defenses there, and now is back with Bruce Arena in New England. The Galaxy just transferred Nick DePuy, who was another sort of guy who they brought up through their Galaxy 2 areas there. So you sort of see the defense has had more sort of impact on those academy players than anywhere else. Although I think there are some players, Adam Saldana, Carlos Harvey, Johnny Perez, are sort of the young core guys who now are sort of fitting into the midfield right now as depth pieces. So a lot of fun. A lot of those kids are so talented. They're so much fun to see. They've been brought up, sort of in and around the club. So it's kind of fun to have that. And obviously, the blueprints for that have been laid throughout the world in terms of guys coming through academies and then being and making, Barcelona, Manchester United, all those vaunted teams that have sort of come up through academies. I would think that eventually that happens in Major League Soccer a little more than it has. But it's spotty right now because teams can go out and spend, $7 or $8 or $12 or $15 million on some really good players and bring them in.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's becoming much bigger deals on that front, isn't it? That's fascinating. But I think the one of the hearts of the of a lot of MLS clubs, and especially from what I've spoken to people about, is the supporters groups, obviously the attendance at the stadium, that sort of stuff. You must have a long history of various different groups coming together and or different factions in the LA Galaxy space. Are there different groups? Are there? Do you have a belonging to certain different sections? How does it work?
I don't. I've always sort of stayed in the neutral category as the reporter and being in the press box. But I have fairly good relationships, I think, with most of them, and it's fun to sort of see them develop. The largest one is Angel City Brigade. They were more of a latecomer to whenever I started. There were sort of some groups that were in there that were trying to sort of put some stuff together. And I want to say ACB was trying to do stuff whenever I had first joined, but they weren't super successful. And then that really took hold probably. I'm sure I'll get the dates wrong and somebody will yell at me for it. But, like in the 2010s, 2011s, I feel like that's when it really started to coalesce into the biggest group that they are. So they sit at the north end of the stadium on the Victoria Street. And now they sit in Victoria Block, which has a bunch of other ones in there. The originals are the Galaxians. They're since '96, so they were at the Rose Bowl with the LA Galaxy. So you have the Galaxians. You have the Ghost Ultra Galaxies, which are new. I think you have the Galaxy Outlaws, which are relatively new in those. And so those groups sort of make that Victoria Block that sits on the north end. And then you have the LA Riot Squad, which is probably the second oldest, or maybe it's the third oldest. I'm sure somebody will yell at me and text me and tell me how wrong I am. But it was really interesting. Current goalkeeper coach Kevin Hartman was an LA Galaxy goalkeeper. And he said and challenged somebody and said, hey, if you get a group of people, and I forget how many he said, if you get a group of people, I'll buy you a keg of beer. And like, if you guys can put together sort of a supporters group and sit them over in the section. And it's like, okay, so they did it. He bought them the beer. And that was the development of the LA Riot Squad. Most infamously famous, sort of in this case, of one of the guys who wanted to fight David Beckham, if you will remember that particular one. He jumped down out of the stadium because Beckham told him to come down there and fight him, and so he did. So, and probably rightfully so at that time as well. I mean, as much as we love to glorify the David Beckham days, there was a lot of times when he did not want to be at the LA Galaxy. He played for AC Milan. He was trying to make Olympic teams, World Cup teams.
Yeah.
I've
forgotten that.
And the Galaxy were kind of horrible as well. So, I mean, I kind of don't blame them, in some ways as well. But yeah, so there's that. But yeah, the LA Riot Squad is probably most infamously known for that. But a very independent supporters group, a little different than every supporters group is different. And so you can sort of find what you want in each one. Like if you want, the sort of bigger crowds and the more like sort of, I don't want to say strict adherence, but there's a lot more sort of like uniformity with Angel City Brigade, right? LA Riot Squad is more like, hey, if you want to be an LA Riot Squad, just buy a ticket and then just come stand in our section. Like, we don't care. Like that sounds good to us, the whole deal. So like there's all these little things that sort of go along. And so you can find your different flavor. And then obviously there's a boycott going on right now from the supporters.
Yes, I was going to ask about that next. Yeah. Thank you for preempting it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could tell that we would probably end up talking about that. So the boycott going on, and supporters groups banded together and basically said that they're not going to show up to any games. That includes preseason. We have a preseason game coming up next weekend where attendance will be allowed because they've been doing some closed door preseason games. But we'll be there. They said it's already started. So basically, we don't expect a lot of supporters to go. They have not mandated that their people don't show up. They've just said, if you agree with the leadership and what we've done, we'd ask that you not go and that you come stay with us, and we'll do watch parties. And we'll watch the games, we'll do it, but we're not going to the stadium. We're not going to support that. And that boycott comes down to the leadership of current president Chris Klein. The LA Galaxy under sanctions for cheating in 2019. And so Chris Klein was the last remaining member sort of that group that was under general manager Dennis Costa, who is now the team president in Feyenoord. And so he's doing that. And then Guillermo Barros-Schelotto, who was the head coach at the time. And then Chris Klein, who was in there, and there was Jovan Karofsky, who was in there as well. So there's those were sort of the people that were around. And so Major League Soccer found out that the LA Galaxy were paying for Christian Pavone, apparently paying contracts outside of the contract that they gave to the league. So they're paying him money outside of the money they said they were giving him. And so that made him not a targeted allocation money player. It actually made him a designated player. And that's against the rules, as you can imagine. And so MLS put a suspension on Chris Klein for the primary transfer window, which is our current one right now. So we'll be in that one. That one closes, I think, April 21st or 24th. I always keep mixing those back up. So he's suspended basically from soccer operations through April 21st. And he was at the end of a contract as well this last year. And so there was a lot of indications that perhaps his contract would not be renewed, being the last time he got a renewal was in 2017, the year that the year where the LA Galaxy won the Wooden Spoon as the worst team in Major League Soccer. He got a 5-year contract extension. So then he comes through here. They had their worst season. Statistically, 2020 was a worse season than 2017, even though they didn't finish last in the league. So that was also under his leadership there. They've gone through Kurt Onalfo as head coach, Siggy Schmidt as head coach, Guillermo Barros-Schelotto as head coach. They went through Dennis Closa as a general manager. They fired Pete Vagenas as a general manager, all under Chris Klein. So this is all these sort of things that have gone through. So the supporters said, no more. We're not going to deal with it anymore. And then AEG, after they knew about everything, apparently renewed his contract. We don't know for how long because they don't want to say. So it's a real interesting time because basically the supporters are saying we've had enough, which is really interesting. I'm a big believer that, and I get in trouble for this all the time. I'm a big believer that say fans and really shouldn't tell organizations how to run. You can try. I'm not saying you shouldn't try, but you should not have. Ultimately, I don't want a front office that you would sit there and say, well, what do the fans think? Like, that's no, you do your job. And then that's going to take care of that. But that's always, and I'm reminded, that's in a perfect world, right? Where performance equals, your job standing. And perhaps, and I certainly think that this is a reasonable take from the supporters, is that the performance has not reflected the job standing. And so therefore, what else can they do? And I agree with that 100%. And I'm always for people boycotting, voting with their wallets, however people want to do it. There is no right way to support. There's no right way to protest. So you figure out what works for you and do it. So I'm really interested to see what that means for this season. Ultimately, that big game that we talked about, LAFC and the LA Galaxy at the Rose Bowl, which is the Galaxy's historic home, on Apple TV. It's supposed to be this huge, big production because it's the first really big game on Apple TV. It's in El Tráfico, which is, I think, again, one of the biggest rivalries in Major League Soccer. And the supporters said they're not going to be there. So I don't know how Apple covers that. I don't know what that looks like because I have to imagine that the LA Galaxy would get pressure from Apple. Because they're spending $2.5 billion and they're going to get a game that has no support from one of the sides, the home side. I would imagine that that the league is pressuring the LA Galaxy to fix this as well because it looks bad. But I don't know if you're AEG that you can sit there and say, okay, well, we're going to listen to you and now fire somebody, because what precedent does that set as well? So it's a staring contest. No idea how it's going to go.
That is so hard. I guess there's no assumption that Chris Klein's suddenly going to say, look, this is all down to me. I'm going to step away. But I mean, it could happen, but
could. I mean, and certainly it was one of my co-hosts, Eric, was on the last one. And he goes, there was the whole thing. And I don't know if you've been following the US World Cup with Claudio Reyna and Gio Reyna. So it's been sort of, Claudio Reyna was the technical director at Austin Austin FC. I think they're an FC or SC. Who knows? There's so many of them. But at Austin's group, and so he was the technical director. Well, he just resigned that role, or was fired, or whatever. And now he's just a consultant because of all the things that happened in there. And my co-host was saying, here you had somebody who either fell on their sword or was ushered out in the correct way, did something. He goes, right, and he goes, and then you look at Chris Klein, who basically agreed. We have to imagine. We always say accused of cheating, but they agreed to the sanctions, so we have to imagine that they did cheat. So, so you have known cheaters that don't want to resign, and that's a tough thing for anybody to sort of sit there and say, how does that work? So I don't know. Perfect perception issue for the LA Galaxy. They think that they have this whole league locked up because they're 5-time MLS Cup champions, because they were the flag bearer and the standard bearer for Major League Soccer for so long. I was talking to somebody who does national broadcasts and other things, and he goes, you can only be so arrogant for so long before it sort of ticks everybody off, right?
Yes, yeah.
The LA Galaxy have long outlived their arrogance at this point, and you have to start behaving like a club that wants to do things the right way. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I know that that the Galaxy as an organization are very touchy about the subject, as you could probably imagine.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know how they can think that they're just going to get positive coverage through everything. It's always one of those things. I was talking with somebody once, and they were complaining about coverage and how bad it was, and like, oh, well, all you guys ever do is talk about the bad things. And this was in 2017, the year they won the wooden spoon. And I said, if you win games, that solves a lot of problems. You might want to start with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
Obviously. So, what proportion do you think of the crowds will be missing? Is it certain supporters groups have just said this is our stance and others not?
Yeah, I mean, no, they've all it's unanimous across all of the supporters groups. It was a joint statement from those leaders, apparently it was something they had discussed beforehand. And they said, man, if he comes back, we may have to do something. And then he came back, and they're like, I guess we're going to have to do something. And so all the leadership, I mean, it was announced. I would like to brag a little bit. It was announced on our podcast officially. The tweet went out approximately 3 minutes before we had, who is one of my co-hosts, the soccer writer for the LA Times, Kevin Baxter. He was the one who broke the story that Chris Klein's contract had been renewed. So I think he tweeted it out about 8:30 or something like that, or a little bit before that. And then 2 minutes later, he was on the show and we were talking about it. So we sort of had it right in that.
Wow.
In that whole thing. And then the supporters groups went on Friday night at the exact same time as Kevin tweeted out his story about Chris Klein having renewed. They tweeted out their joint proclamation that basically said they were boycotting the season until Chris Klein was gone. And Jovan Krofsky, I should point out, that gets left out a lot. They want Jovan and Chris gone. Those are the only terms that they see acceptable.
Wow, fascinating.
So I don't know how many. I mean, certainly whenever you get large groups like LA Riot Squad or Angel City Brigade or any, you can have 40% say, yeah, we're absolutely going to boycott, and 60% say they don't, then you're not going to really see it. So I have no idea what that number is going to be. There's a lot of people who are like, I'm not going. There was a lot of people who canceled season tickets last year, and the LA Galaxy were one of the best teams in Major League Soccer down the stretch, and there were people canceling season tickets because they're like, not with who's in charge of things. That doesn't work. So, ultimately, and I've told this to somebody else, I said the LA Galaxy are an MLS Cup challenger this year. They have not been that in a very long time. So it's one of those things. And you have this going on. A lot of ways, it's not so much about the performance on the field, but it's about how the people in the front office are reacting or respecting the people that they're supposed to be serving. So super interesting. Somebody said, well, what happens if the LA Galaxy start out and they win like their first 10 games? Well, unlikely, but still you go through it. It's like, well, are people going to come back? And I go, I don't know. I mean, certainly for the diehards who are standing on principle, they're not coming back.
Yeah.
Like they do not care. It's not about what's happening this year, because Greg Vanney is in charge of a lot of things. Greg Vanney is trying to hold this organization up, and he has to answer for all of the stuff that has happened for other people when he wasn't there. He's in an impossibly difficult position. The LA Galaxy have been banned from making any summer transfers in terms of on the international market. So only intra-league stuff is sort of what they can do. So, I mean, super interesting. From a neutral perspective, super like, I can't wait to see what's going to happen,
because the drama is amazing. Yeah,
there's stories everywhere, so it's sort of like, oh man, this is going to be it's a lot of fun. I have an addiction to live soccer. I love going to watch live soccer. So much fun. So that's where I get my enjoyment out of it. Win, lose, draw, all those other things. It's always fun, and being a cover team, and I know so many of the guys, it's always nice for them to be successful because I like that for them. But some of my most interesting seasons have been like 2017, which was an absolute dumpster fire. We had, at one point, I think we had almost like SWAT team guys coming to the supporters section trying to get them out of the stadium after a game because they weren't leaving. Wow. Right. And it was like the LA County Sheriff was there, and like all these people, and they're like, you guys have to leave. And the Galaxy had to send out somebody to go talk to them. They sent out a player, Roman Alessandrini, who's a great guy. They sent him out to go talk to everybody. And he's like, we know, we're trying better, we're trying harder, the whole deal. And that's when they finally got to leave. But that was 2017.
That's a very brave thing to do. Put yourself forward for that.
He was a good guy. People are still asking for him to come back. He was just injured a lot, so it was tough to sort of rely on him for a lot of different rights. But really nice, super nice guy, and a really passionate sort of football player. It was a lot of fun.
I really wonder how this will. I've got a piece I'm just working on at the moment. It's going to come out soon on the amount home advantage, the effect it has, and the statistics on it, which I found absolutely fascinating when I dug into those. For some teams, it's really, really a massive thing, the home advantage, and for some doesn't seem to matter so much. And there's even one outlier of which that they play much, much better away and terribly at home. So
of course,
but that will come out soon. But I wonder if that is it's got to affect the players somehow, isn't it? Having less support, not having the roar of support that you would normally have behind you.
I would expect it's we haven't gotten to talk to a lot of players, and whenever we had our media availability with Greg, and we got to talk to a couple different players as well. Jonathan Bond, who is half English, half American goalkeeper. We had talked to him a little bit, but that was before that news had broken. It was in the morning of when the news broke, so we didn't get to talk to anybody and sort of say, hey, what does this mean? And then the next day, Friday, was when they announced the boycott. And I think the media availability that we had, I wasn't there, but we had one of the reporters who I know, he came on our show, and he said they didn't get to talk to any players. It was, and sometimes it's just a matter of availability. It's not a big deal most of the time, especially in the preseason. We don't push it too hard, although there's requirements from MLS that everybody has to be available all the time whenever we ask, that type of things. But we're going to give guys time to sort of do their thing and all that. So we didn't get to talk to any players. We didn't really even get to talk to, they talked to Greg Vanny about it. And he basically put out a party line that was like, hey, I think everybody just wants us on the same page. They want us winning.
Yep.
And the whole deal. And yes, but no. And that's the correct answer from Greg, because that's what he needs to focus on and do stuff. But that's not the answer the supporters are looking for. And it's not the reason for the boycott. It's not just about winning. So obviously big part. And if they had won a whole bunch over these years, I don't think anybody would be complaining, but that's not the case that it has been. And so you sort of see this. It's going to be interesting to talk to them. Preseason games coming up next Saturday. So I should be there, which means we'll get to talk to some players afterwards, and we'll see if preseason games are sparsely attended anyway. So it's not like you're really going to get a full, but the supporters groups are usually the ones that show up for those preseason games. So you should see a little bit of a difference there. We can ask the players. It'll be sort of interesting to get their take on it and sort of see how they see it. But I think you're right. I mean, ultimately it could. If you go to a Rose Bowl game on the first game of the season and you have, let's say it's 80,000 people there, maybe it's 60,000 people. It's going to be a lot of people that you can put almost 100,000 people at the Rose Bowl. So there's going to be a lot of people. But what if 80% of those are LAFC fans? At a home game for the LA Galaxy, because I know there's people who bought tickets that weren't cheap, and they're like, I'm not going. Wow. And I'm not selling my tickets. I'm not going to sell them somewhere. I'm keeping the tickets, and we're not going.
And it's like, there's going to be a significant amount of empty seats, whatever happens.
And it should be fair. I would imagine that it's more lopsided than people expect it to be. I thought there was already a question about whether or not it would be 50-50 or even 60-40, because LAFC is coming off of an MLS Cup. This is sort of almost their coronation. Whenever it's their celebration, and they try to do it at a Rose Bowl, which is the historic home of the LA Galaxy. And it should be pointed out that LAFC has never beaten the LA Galaxy in any home game. So that has not happened. They're undefeated at Dignity Health Sports Park, and so the Galaxy have never lost a game to LAFC at home. And now you take that to the Rose Bowl, technically speaking, a home game. So we'll see if that trend continues. But this is it's a big game, and there could be nobody there. So,
wow. Do you know between the two teams, if there's a youngster growing up in LA who likes soccer, what would make them go to one side or the other? Is it geographical? Is there a locational sort of thing, or is it just a split of? It could go either way.
I mean, if you're looking at my overall sports opinion of Los Angeles, if you're winning, you're gonna get the attention, right?
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who's a good friend who's not a soccer fan. He was asking me how things were going. And I said, good. The Galaxy are generally horrible and have been since 2017. But the whole deal. He goes, well, yeah, everybody's about LAFC right now. And I go, you're right. They are, because LAFC has put together some good seasons. They put together some good players. They won an MLS Cup. They've done things that you're supposed to do in order to do it. They have a really cool downtown location, which is really hard to get to, and I hate going there. But that's beside the point. Other people think it's fine, But you look at that and you say, that's what's going to do it. It's going to be winning. And if you're trying to sort of, and we always joke like MLS 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, like what's the version of MLS that we're in? Yeah. Maybe we're in 4 now. You sort of, well, in 4.0, LAFC is the clear head and shoulders above the LA Galaxy. I mean, if you want to talk about ceding a city to somebody, the LA Galaxy just sort of said, here you go, take Los Angeles, because we're not going to, even compete for it. We're not going to compete for it off the field. We're not going to compete for it on the field. Yeah. We're not going to be good enough as an organization, and we're going to rely on the fact that we have 5 MLS Cups to do all of our advertising for us. Well, they lost that. That's gone. And so, if you're a young kid right now, I mean, I have a 3-year-old, if the LA Galaxy aren't careful, he's going to be wearing LAFC gear here, in no time. Yeah. I mean, and you're talking about somebody who's given 15 years to covering a team, and 1,000 shows and all this time. But I mean, what am I going to tell him? Yeah. Hey, you know what? In your lifetime, you have never seen the LA Galaxy be good. Never. It has not happened. So, the Galaxy have to start by winning on the field, but they have to change the way that they sort of, attack the surrounding areas as well. So, you talked about geographically, the LA Galaxy Stadium is more in a suburb of Los Angeles. Now, LA is a giant sprawl anyway. So I live well south of LA. It takes me 45 to 50 minutes to drive there, mostly because of traffic, more than anything else. But, we sort of consider ourselves still part of that sprawl in Los Angeles, even if I live in Orange County. And there's a lot of people who are like, I live in Orange County, not Los Angeles. And it's like, okay, whole deal. Well, where the LA Galaxy, sort of have their stadium is more of a suburb. It's a little bit out. So it's not in the downtown corridor that, a lot of teams are sort of trying to get now. And so that has something to do with it as well, as people expect their sports teams to sort of play in these downtown areas. Having said that, a lot of teams across LA don't play in the downtown areas. The Dodgers are a little north, the Rams are further south, the Clippers will be a little further south than they were, so like you could sort of see all these different teams. But all that sort of goes into it. I've been around long enough to see people love. There's a big college rivalry, certainly in Los Angeles, with USC and UCLA. I've seen that go back and forth like 30 times, where everybody's a USC fan or everybody's a UCLA fan, and that goes back and forth. Yeah. I would imagine, despite the fact that everybody says that once you're a supporter of a team, you're that way forever. I don't believe that. I believe, and I think they've done studies that say most people switch during their lifetime.
Really?
Actually, like the majority of people, and obviously not within hardcore groups. So for a podcast that preaches to hardcore people, I say that and people are like, that's not true. It's like, I know, but you're not the audience I'm trying to hit with that.
Exactly. You're an objective viewer of it.
Yeah. You're locked in. You're not going anywhere. I get that. You are the outlier though, in a lot of this. So it's fun, especially I would imagine in England or in Europe, where you tell people that the majority of people switch. They would sit there and go, no, they don't. You're born into this, right?
Like, no, it can't happen, surely.
Yeah. I think we have to sort of look at more general worldview of that most people switch, especially in Los Angeles. With the Rams and NFL, and then they go away and then they come back, and it's sort of like Los Angeles a lot of times doesn't need professional sports, and so they're always like, whatever, we don't care who you are, where you are. Like if you start winning and you have some stars, we'll start paying attention. The Dodgers are a perfect example of that too, which is a team that struggled for a while and sort of was just on the edge of sort of the whole city's consciousness. A ton of diehard Dodger fans, for Major League Baseball, but they were horrible. And so you didn't want to go up the Chavez Ravine and try to get through traffic in LA and try to go to the stadium because you knew they were bad. So that's the thing. Once they got good ownership, and they sort of made that, now, you can't get a ticket to go to Dodger Stadium. So it all matters. Winning matters. Win games, and a lot of this stuff gets solved.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to solve an enormous amount of problems, but who knows on that front? There's a lot of work behind the scenes, I guess, as well. So, just finally, I wanted to cover just the upcoming season for you. And we've covered it a little bit. But what would represent a good season? What would you say at the end of the year, sort of going, okay, that was decent? Yeah,
playoffs are a minimum,
right.
Which, and I think, for the most part, 50% of teams in Major League Soccer make the playoffs. So I'm not necessarily concerned that that's a huge deal. I think it's going to be 8-8 is what they're saying. So 8 teams from each conference. So being in the top 8 shouldn't be that hard overall in terms of where it is. So playoffs are a minimum, but I think a Western Conference final is sort of almost where you expect the LA Galaxy to be. So if you're not playing for a Western Conference final, and then if you're playing for a Western Conference final, you could very easily be playing for an MLS Cup, right? So you get to that final stage and how you do it. I would like to see some consistency from them, because they were very inconsistent. Started the season off pretty well, had a sort of the doldrums in the summer that were bad. And, at one point, the LA Galaxy were definitely on the outside looking into the playoff picture. And then Riqui Puig and Gaston Brugman came in. The Galaxy sort of made those, and that changed everything. The last 12 games, the LA Galaxy were a very good team. There were some teams, as somebody pointed out, I said the LA Galaxy were playing the best soccer at the end of the year. I think out of anybody. And then they pointed out in the last 12 games, like Montreal had a better record or Philadelphia had a better record. And I'm like, I'm not talking about records. I'm talking about how they were playing.
Yeah.
And I really thought that the Galaxy were one of those teams. So it's the expectation is that you build on that. And I'm here to tell you that doesn't always work, because I've certainly been in there in 2019, the year the Galaxy are accused of cheating. They made the playoffs. They won a playoff game. They got knocked out by LAFC. The next year, you're like, okay, cool. They're going to build off that. Now, granted, pandemic year, everything shut down, things were really weird, but they were horrible. They had, again, statistically one of their worst seasons. So it doesn't always build the way that you expect it to. And I think there's some huge question marks in the building of this team right now, with less than, I think, like 27 days until the first game of the season. They don't have any wingers. So you have like 3-4 weeks to get everybody in and figure that out. If you're taking the first game of the year as your starting point, Greg Vanney has told us that the primary transfer window doesn't close until April. So the first game's in February. You have time to still add. Yeah. I could see him doing that. I could see him waiting a little bit and trying to find the right player. And I think they were waiting for the European window to close too. And, and then once that's closed, the MLS window is still open. So it gives less people a chance to sort of shop around and do some different things. Like, you could come here. We'll give you money if you want to come here. So those types of things. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't kidding. I think they're an MLS Cup contender. I think they could probably be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the Western Conference, and they finished 4th in the Western Conference last year. Yeah. At one point, I predicted they were a top 3 in the Western Conference team, and they finished 4th. Not bad. I'll take that one. I'll pat myself on the back. Yeah. But that was really because of their explosion towards the end of the season. Otherwise, they were like the 7th or 8th or 9th best team in Major League Soccer. So it's sort of goes that way. They have to be there for a cup. I think Greg Vanney's job is on the line this year. He has, I think this is his 3rd year of his contract. He's been very good. I would expect, knowing sort of how I expect them to play, that he'll be back and he'll get a contract extension, and that'll sort of do things. But if it goes all sideways at the first, third of the season or 2/3 of the season, Greg Vanney could be out. This is the year that his job is actually on the line. I thought the first 2 years, no. This year, yes. So, that's something to sort of pay attention to as that goes. But, they should play well. Riqui Puig is a really big talent for Major League Soccer, a young player. He's fun to watch. Gaston Brugman has a ton of energy. So as long as they stay sort of healthy in those ways, and I think Greg Vanney thinks they've gotten stronger in terms of depth, and the depth is going to be important. There's Leagues Cup, which is the tournament against Liga MX that happens in the year.
Yeah, the inaugural season.
Yeah. And so that's going to be a whole slew of games, I would imagine. You're guaranteed 2 games, but, I would imagine the Galaxy can get out of groups. So now that's guaranteed about 3 or 4 games whenever you sort of look at that. So you can build into those things. But yeah, it's a really interesting season in terms of not only the boycott, the front office stuff, but then on the field. So they are far from a complete team right now. They have to make some signings. They probably have to make 3 or 4 signings before the window closes. And then they don't get a summer window, really.
Of course, yeah, good. So we're expecting those players to come in and watch this space, and Corner of the Galaxy is the place to hear about those things. So yeah, if you're not already subscribed to viewers, then please do check that out. Just remains for me to say, Josh, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, if you're looking for me, it's simple on Twitter at Galaxy Podcast. And then of course cornerofthegalaxy.com is where you can find all that stuff. Type in Corner of the Galaxy on YouTube as well, and you can subscribe to the channel. You'll find us there. And we do 2 live shows every week on Mondays and Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Pacific Coast time, and those usually last between an hour and an hour and a half. There's a live chat going on. You can get your questions in there. You can get your super chats. We'll answer questions. People make me say words they know I can't pronounce, so it's a great time.
They are really fantastic, and like I say, I've heard the podcast. I haven't had the pleasure of a live one, but certainly the recorded. They are fantastic, and the people are really engaged and ask very, very pertinent questions as well. So it's clearly a very good setup you've got going there. I'll put all your details in the description below for people to find you. But thank you very much, and best of luck for the season.
Thanks, Tom. Certainly appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.